Don't get on that plane. I just heard your son on the phone say, 12 days. That's all we need. She won't even know what hit her until she lands. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. 22 years I had given him. Free rent when he lost his first job, $47,000 in loans he never once repaid, the down payment on the house he now called his own. And this was what "you deserve to relax" Mom had really meant. But I did not set down my suitcase. Because there was something my son didn't know. I had already been planning too. My name is Eleanor Voss, and I am 72 years old. I want to tell you this story slowly, the way I lived it, because if I rush it, you will miss the parts that matter. The parts where I was foolish and the parts where I was not. I was born in a small house outside Harrisburg, the kind with a porch that sagged a little more every winter. My father drove a delivery truck. My mother cleaned houses on the good side of town and came home smelling like other people's lemon polish. I learned early that dignity was not something you were given. It was something you built, brick by brick, out of the hours nobody thanked you for. I married Frank Voss when I was 23. He was a quiet man, an electrician, the kind who fixed things without being asked and never once raised his voice in 38 years of marriage. We had one son, Nathan, born on a Tuesday in March, and from the moment they placed him in my arms, I understood that love, real love, is a debt you agree to pay without ever expecting to be repaid. Frank and I were not wealthy people in the way magazines mean it. But we were careful. We saved. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home in 1979 and paid it off 11 years early by skipping vacations, by mending coats instead of buying new ones, by treating every dollar like it owed us an explanation. When Frank's small electrical contracting business finally took off in his 50s, we didn't change our habits. We simply changed what we could give. And what we gave, mostly, was Nathan. College tuition. $62,000 across 4 years, paid in full, no loans, because Frank believed a young man should start his adult life without chains around his ankles. A used car when Nathan graduated, replaced 18 months later with a newer one when the first one's transmission failed. $11,000 toward his wedding to Rachel, a wedding neither of us particularly wanted to attend given how coldly Rachel's family looked at us that day, but we smiled through it because that is what you do for your son. Then, 4 years ago, Frank died. A heart that simply stopped one Sunday morning while he was refilling the bird feeder in our backyard. I found him there, in the grass, and I have never since been able to look at a bird feeder without my chest going tight. After Frank was gone, Nathan became, in his words, the man of the family now. What that meant in practice was this. He began asking for money more often and more urgently. And I began giving it more readily, because grief makes you generous in strange and unguarded ways. You want, desperately, for someone to need you, because the person who needed you most is gone. Over the following 4 years, I gave Nathan and Rachel $47,000. I have the bank records. I have always kept records. A habit, Frank taught me, God rest him, because he said a woman who keeps her own books is a woman who cannot be lied to. $14,000 for a temporary cash flow issue in his consulting business. $9,000 for Rachel's dental work, though I later learned it was cosmetic, not medical. $22,000 spread across 11 months that they told me was for catching up on the mortgage on a house I later learned was never behind on a single payment. I want to be clear about something. I did not give this money because I am weak or foolish or because I did not notice the pattern. I gave it because I believed, the way you believe the sun will rise, that my son loved me, and that love like that does not lie. I was wrong about very little in my life. I was wrong about that. The pattern began, as these things always do, with small things. Things so small that if I told you about just one of them, you would tell me I was imagining trouble where there was none. But grief and age have given me one gift: patience. I noticed, and I said nothing, and I watched. It started with the phone calls Nathan would take in another room when he visited. Not unusual on its own. Everyone steps away to take a call, but he began doing it every single time, without exception, and he began closing doors that had never been closed in that house before. Not when Frank was alive, not ever. Then there was the afternoon in February when I stopped by unannounced to drop off a casserole, and I saw, spread across the kitchen table before Rachel hurriedly gathered them up, papers with letterhead I recognized, Kirchner and Voss Elder Law Associates. I did not know a firm by that name. I filed it away. Then came the comment, offhand, from Rachel's mother at a birthday dinner in April, 3 glasses of wine into the evening, when she said, laughing, "Well, once the house situation is settled, you two will finally breathe easier." I asked what house situation. Rachel's mother's smile went stiff, and Nathan changed the subject so fast I nearly got whiplash from the turn of it. Then there was the day in May when Nathan called me. Not visited, called, which itself was unusual. He preferred to deliver difficult requests in person where my face couldn't retreat into silence over a phone line, and told me, with a warmth in his voice I had not heard directed at me in over a year, that he wanted to give me a gift. A trip. 2 weeks in Switzerland. Alps, lakes, the whole postcard of it. "You deserve to relax, Mom," he said. "You've given us so much. Let us give you something back." I want you to understand something about that sentence. In 22 years, my son had never once used the words, "Let us give you something back." Not once. And a woman who has raised a child, who has memorized the particular music of his voice, the way you memorize a favorite song, knows immediately when a new note has been added that does not belong to the melody. I said yes. I smiled. I even hugged him, and I meant that hug, because some part of me, the part that still wanted, more than anything, to believe my son loved me without conditions, hoped I was wrong about everything I had been quietly cataloging for months. But that night, I called Dorothy. Dorothy Callahan has been my closest friend for 41 years. We met at a church rummage sale in 1985 arguing, gently, over the same secondhand teapot, and we have not stopped talking since. Dorothy is sharp in the way that people mistake for cynicism until they realize she is simply paying closer attention than everyone else in the room. Her late husband was a claims investigator for an insurance company, and something of his old instincts rubbed off on her over 30 years of marriage. She now says things like, "Follow the paperwork, not the person," the way other people say "bless you" after a sneeze. "Eleanor," she said, after I told her everything. The closed doors, the law firm letterhead, the comment about the house situation, the sudden generous trip. "I think you already know what I'm going to say." "Say it anyway," I told her. "I need to hear it out loud." They're moving on something. The house, the accounts, maybe both. And they want you out of the country while they do it. I sat with that for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. "I need a lawyer," I finally said. "Not theirs. Mine." Dorothy gave me the name of a man she trusted completely. Richard Hale, an elder law attorney who had helped her own sister untangle a similarly ugly situation with a stepson 3 years prior. I called his office the next morning and had an appointment within the week. Richard Hale is a compact, unhurried man in his 60s with reading glasses that live permanently on the end of his nose and a manner of speaking that makes you feel, for the first time in months, that someone in the room is entirely on your side. I sat across from his desk and told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, which is rarer in this world than it should be. "Mrs. Voss," he said, when I had finished, "I want you to bring me every financial document you have. Bank statements, the deed to your house, any power of attorney documents you may have signed, even ones you don't remember signing clearly. And I want the name of that other law firm you saw on the table." "Kirchner and Voss Elder Law Associates," I said. "Though I don't know anyone named Voss there. It's not us." Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. Elder law firms handling matters for a client's own mother, without that mother present or informed, generally means one of 2 things: a guardianship petition, or a competency evaluation filed as a precursor to one. The room went very quiet. "They think I'm losing my mind," I said. "I don't know what they think," Richard said carefully. "But if a petition like that gets filed while you're out of the country, unreachable, unable to respond to a court notice in time, a judge can sometimes grant a temporary guardianship by default, simply because the respondent didn't appear. It happens more than you'd hope. And a temporary guardian can, in some jurisdictions, get emergency authority over a person's finances and property within days. I thought of the trip. 12 days in Switzerland, gifted so suddenly, so generously, by a son who had asked me for money 11 times in 4 years and never once asked me to simply rest. "They want me on that plane," I said quietly. I think, Richard said, we need to find out exactly what they're planning before you get anywhere near an airport. That was the decision. Not a single dramatic moment, though I know you may have expected one. A slammed door, a scream, a confrontation in a driveway. It was quieter than that. It was a woman sitting in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon, deciding, calmly, that she would not be moved out of her own life like a piece of furniture inconveniencing a renovation. Richard's investigator. A soft-spoken former paralegal named Marion Diaz, who did this kind of quiet digging for a living, found the filing within 9 days. Kirchner and Voss Elder Law Associates had indeed been retained. Not by Nathan directly, interestingly, but by Rachel, who had listed herself as primary concerned family member on an intake form dated 6 weeks before Nathan ever mentioned Switzerland to me. The intake form described me, in Rachel's own words, as someone who had exhibited signs of confusion and poor financial judgment, evidenced by irregular gifting patterns to family members. I read that sentence 3 times. My irregular gifting patterns. The $47,000 I had given them, out of love and grief and the desperate hope of still being needed by someone, was now the evidence being used to prove that I could no longer be trusted with my own money. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself with tears. It arrives instead as a stillness, a cold clarity, as though someone has opened a window in a room you didn't know had grown stale. That is what I felt, reading that sentence. Marion's research uncovered the rest over the following 2 weeks. A hearing date had been scheduled for the 11th day of my trip. Rachel and Nathan had also, separately, contacted a realtor about the eventual sale of my home, pending resolution of guardianship matters, a phrase that made my modest 3-bedroom house, the one Frank and I paid off 11 years early through skipped vacations and mended coats, sound like a parcel of land awaiting rezoning. And there was one more thing. A voicemail, accidentally left on my old answering machine. The one I kept in the kitchen out of sentiment. The one Nathan didn't know still worked. Because who calls a landline in this day and age? That had recorded 11 seconds of a call he clearly meant to place to Rachel instead. 11 seconds of my son's voice, saying, just get her to the airport. Once she's in the air, we've got the whole window clear. 12 days is more than enough. I listened to that recording 4 times before I could make myself stop. Now, I could have confronted him right then. I could have called Nathan and screamed into the phone every wound his words had opened. I want to tell you honestly that some small, tired part of me wanted exactly that. Wanted to hurt him back in the fastest, loudest way available, the way a burned hand wants to strike out at whatever burned it. But Frank did not raise a woman who confuses speed with strength. And I did not raise Nathan to think his mother could be outmaneuvered simply because she was 72 and grieving and generous. So instead, I made a plan. 3 stages. Methodical. Quiet. Stage 1, I did not cancel the trip. Richard advised strongly against giving them any early warning that I knew, so I thanked Nathan again for his generosity. I packed a suitcase. I let them believe, right up until the morning of the flight, that their timeline was intact. Stage 2, I moved. With Richard's help, I placed my home into a revocable living trust, with Dorothy named as successor trustee, a woman with no financial motive whatsoever and 41 years of proven loyalty. I consolidated my accounts under that same trust structure. I signed a durable power of attorney naming Dorothy, not Nathan, effective immediately, which meant that even if a guardianship petition somehow succeeded, there would be nothing left ownerless for a court-appointed stranger to seize control of. Every asset I had would already belong, structurally, to an entity my son had no standing to touch. Stage 3. I asked Richard to prepare a response to the guardianship petition, ready to be filed the instant it was needed, along with a formal request for a full competency evaluation performed by a neutral, court-appointed physician of my own choosing, rather than one selected by Rachel's attorneys. I have never in my life failed a test I was allowed to actually take. I was not afraid of a fair evaluation. I was only ever afraid of an unfair one, conducted in my absence, based on paperwork written by people who had decided the answer before asking the question. All of this was finished 4 days before my flight. And then Nathan drove me to the airport himself, the picture of a devoted son, carrying my suitcase to the curb, hugging me tightly at the security line, saying, "Enjoy every minute of it, Mom. You've earned it." I hugged him back. I meant that hug, too, in its way. I was hugging the boy I remembered, even while I understood, with total clarity, that the man standing in front of me had just tried to disappear his mother for 12 days so he could take apart her life piece by piece in her absence. I walked toward my gate, and that is where the stranger found me. His name, I would later learn, was Marcus Webb, a security contractor in his 50s who had been standing near the gate returning a call of his own when he overheard, 3 feet away, a young man pacing near the window speaking urgently into his phone. Marcus told me later he almost didn't say anything. Not my business, he'd thought, the way most of us think when we overhear something that unsettles us. But something in the tone, he said, made the hair on his arms stand up. A coldness, a calculation. He heard the words 12 days, and she won't even know, and something in him simply could not let me walk onto that plane without knowing what he'd heard. I did not tell Marcus, in that first moment, that I already knew everything he was telling me. I let him finish. I thanked him with my whole chest, because a stranger's decency, offered with nothing to gain, is one of the purest things this world still produces, and I did not want to rob him of the moment by revealing how prepared I already was. Then I did something my son did not expect. I did not go home. I boarded the plane. I want to explain why, because I imagine some of you are shouting at your screens right now. I boarded that plane because Richard had already filed my formal opposition and my request for an independent evaluation the moment the guardianship hearing was scheduled. Filed before I ever left, timed precisely so that it would land on the court's desk within the exact window Nathan believed was clear. I boarded that plane because nothing Nathan and Rachel intended to do while I was gone could touch a single asset they were aiming for, since none of it belonged to me directly anymore. It belonged to a trust they had never known existed. And I boarded that plane, above all, because I refused to let my son's cruelty be the reason I finally stopped living my own life. Frank and I had planned to see the Alps together once, years ago, before his business demanded every spare dollar we had. I decided, standing at that gate with Marcus Webb's kind, worried face in front of me, that I would see them now, for both of us, and that I would not let fear make that decision for me. "Ma'am," Marcus said, clearly alarmed, "are you sure you should get on that flight?" "I'm very sure," I told him. "But I want you to know something, and I want you to remember it, because I think you're the kind of man who needs to hear how a story ends once you've stepped into the middle of it. You didn't ruin my trip today. You gave me the last piece of information I needed to know my plan would work. Thank you." I gave him my number. I told him I would call him when I landed, so he would know I was safe, and so I could tell him the rest. He looked at me the way you look at someone you suspect is either in shock or is the calmest person you've ever met, and honestly, I think it was some of both. I spent 12 days in Switzerland. I will not pretend that trip was easy. There were mornings I woke in that beautiful hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva and cried, quietly, into a pillow that smelled like lavender soap, grieving not just Frank, but the version of Nathan I had believed in for 38 years. But there were also mornings I stood on a mountain trail in the cold, clean air, breathing in a view Frank never got to see, and felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in months. Dorothy and Richard both had my full itinerary. I checked in with them every evening. The hearing came and went on schedule, while I stood in a chocolate shop in Lucerne trying, unsuccessfully, not to laugh at the absurdity of it. My son's carefully timed scheme, colliding head-on with a stack of paperwork he did not know existed. The judge, reviewing Richard's opposition and my written request for an independent evaluation, denied the emergency guardianship petition outright and scheduled a full hearing for 6 weeks later, this time with me present, represented, and, as Richard put it, extremely well documented. The realtor Rachel had contacted was informed, politely but firmly by Richard's office, that the property in question belonged to an irrevocable trust and was not, in fact, for sale, pending, or otherwise. I came home on the 13th day, tanned and rested and entirely unbroken, and I called a family dinner for that Sunday. I chose Sunday because Sunday dinners had always meant something in our family. Frank's chair at the head of the table, the good china that only came out for holidays, and this one weekly ritual, a habit we'd kept since Nathan was small. I wanted this conversation to happen in that room, at that table, because I wanted my son to understand exactly what he was choosing to destroy. Nathan arrived first, tanned by nothing but stress, I noted, his smile a half-second too eager. Rachel came in behind him, and I watched her eyes go, instantly and involuntarily, to the folder sitting squarely in the center of the table before I had said a single word. "Mom," Nathan said, hugging me. "How was Switzerland? You look wonderful. It was extraordinary," I told him, and I meant it. The mountains were exactly as beautiful as your father always imagined they'd be. We sat. I did not rush. I poured water for everyone, the way I had 1,000 Sundays before this one, and then I opened the folder. "I know about Kirchner and Voss," I said. "I know about the guardianship petition Rachel filed 6 weeks before you ever mentioned Switzerland to me. I know about the realtor. And I have a recording from my old answering machine of you telling Rachel, quote, just get her to the airport. Once she's in the air, we've got the whole window clear. 12 days is more than enough." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever sat inside of. Rachel's face went white, then blotched red at the neck the way faces do when shame arrives faster than words can catch up to it. "Eleanor, we were worried about you. The gifting, the money, it wasn't, we thought. You thought a woman who gave her son and daughter-in-law $47,000 out of love was too confused to be trusted with what remained of her own life," I said. My voice did not rise. "I want you to understand that. I had promised myself, and Frank's memory, that whatever happened at this table would happen with dignity, not with the screaming I could have justified and did not want. You didn't file that petition because you were worried about my mind, Rachel. You filed it because you had already decided what you wanted, and I was simply the obstacle standing between you and it." Rachel began to cry. Not, I think, from guilt exactly. More from the particular horror of being fully seen after working very hard not to be. "I told him it was wrong," she said, through tears. "I told him there had to be a better way. He said you'd never agree to sign anything if we just asked." I turned to my son. And here's the part of this story I have thought about more than any other in the months since. Because I watched, in real time, 2 people I loved respond to the same exposed truth in 2 entirely different ways. Nathan did not cry. He did not apologize. He looked at me with an expression I had genuinely never seen on his face in 38 years. A flatness, almost administrative, as though I had simply presented a business problem rather than a broken heart. "Mom, be reasonable," he said. "You're 72. You live alone in a house too big for you. We were trying to get ahead of things before they became a crisis. This isn't about the money. It is entirely about the money, Nathan," I said. "If it were about my well-being, you would have sat across from me at this very table and asked me how I was doing. You would not have hired a law firm to build a paper case against me in secret. You would not have tried to put me on an airplane so the courtroom would be empty of the one person whose voice actually mattered. You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said, and his voice cracked then, finally, though I noticed. "And I want to be honest with you, because I promised myself honesty even in this, that the crack came only when he realized the plan had failed, not when he realized what the plan had cost me. The business isn't doing what I told you it was doing. We're underwater on the house. I thought if I could just get things settled, get some breathing room. By taking my house," I said, "by taking what your father and I built with our own hands, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, so that you would never have to feel what real hardship feels like." "I was trying to fix things," he said, "for all of us." "No," I said. "You were trying to fix things for you, and you were willing to erase me to do it." Rachel, still crying, reached toward my hand across the table. I did not pull away, but I did not take it either. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I should never have let it get this far. I knew it was wrong the whole time, and I did it anyway because I was scared, and that's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse." "No," I agreed gently. "It isn't. But it is at least the truth, and you're the only one at this table who's offered me that tonight." Nathan stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "So what? You're going to punish us? Take everything and leave us with nothing? Is that the plan?" And here, finally, is the moment I had been waiting for. Not with anger, but with something closer to relief. The relief of finally being able to put down a weight I had carried quietly for months. "No, Nathan," I said. "I am not going to punish you. I already protected myself, weeks ago, in a way that makes punishment unnecessary. Everything I own is in an irrevocable trust now. My house cannot be sold by you, by Rachel, or by any court-appointed guardian, ever, regardless of what any future petition claims about my mind. My accounts cannot be touched by anyone but Dorothy, who has been my friend for 41 years and has never once, in all that time, asked me for a single dollar. You didn't lose a fight tonight. You lost the chance to have this conversation on your terms instead of mine. That's all. The rest was already decided before I ever got on that plane. He stared at me. I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet, but the dawning, humiliating understanding that the woman he had spent months quietly cataloging as diminished, confused, easy to move past like furniture in a renovation, had in fact been 11 steps ahead of him the entire time. You knew, he said slowly, before you even got on the plane. You knew everything. I have known for months, I said. I simply chose not to let you see me knowing, because I wanted to understand exactly how far you were willing to go before I decided how far I was willing to go in return. Rachel spoke again, quieter now, steadier. What happens now? Now, I said, you have a choice, both of you. I am not interested in destroying my son. I buried his father 4 years ago, and I do not intend to bury the rest of what's left of my family out of spite. But I will not be gifted trips as cover stories again. I will not be a line item in anyone's financial recovery plan. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be an honest one, built the way your father and I built everything, slowly and on solid ground. If you cannot manage that, I understand. But I will not pretend, ever again, not to know what I know. Rachel nodded immediately, still crying, but with something steadier underneath it now. The shape, I thought, of a woman finally putting down a lie she'd been carrying longer than just these past months. Nathan said nothing for a long moment. Then he sat back down, slowly, and put his face in his hands, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet in a way I hadn't seen since he was 9 years old and his father caught him lying about a broken window. I don't know how to fix this, he said, and for the first time all evening, I believed every word. You don't fix it in one dinner, I told him. You fix it the way you fix anything worth keeping. Slowly, honestly, one Sunday at a time. That was 6 months ago. I will not tell you it has all been easy since, because I promised you the truth, and easy is not the truth. There have been Sundays Nathan didn't come. There was one terrible argument in March when old resentment surfaced ugly and raw, and Rachel and I did not speak for 3 weeks. But there have also been Sundays when Nathan arrived early to help me weed the garden Frank used to keep, saying almost nothing, working quietly beside me the way his father used to. There was the afternoon Rachel showed up alone, unannounced, and simply sat with me on the porch for 2 hours, and near the end of it said, quietly, I want to be the kind of person who would have told you the truth from the beginning. I'm working on becoming her. I told her I believed she could. I meant it. The guardianship petition was formally withdrawn before the second hearing ever occurred. Kirchner and Voss Elder Law Associates, I later learned from Richard, had 2 other similar complaints filed against them within the same year by other families of aging parents, and I have since made sure, quietly, that a few of my friends in similar situations know to be wary of any law firm approaching them about a parent's irregular gifting patterns. Marcus Webb, the stranger who stopped me at that gate, came to dinner at my house last month. I wanted him to meet Dorothy and Richard and to see, with his own eyes, the ending to a story he had only ever known the terrifying middle of. He cried a little, actually, when I told him the whole thing start to finish, and he said something I have not been able to stop thinking about since. I almost didn't say anything. I almost told myself it wasn't my business. I told him that of all the lessons this year taught me, that might be the most important one to pass along. That decency, offered by a stranger with nothing to gain, has a way of arriving exactly when it's needed most, if only we're brave enough to offer it. As for me, I still have that trust. I still have my house, the one Frank and I paid off 11 years early through skipped vacations and mended coats. I still have Dorothy, 41 years and counting, teapot arguments and all. And I have something else now, too. A clearer sense than I've had in years of exactly where the line sits between generosity and disappearance, between loving someone and letting them erase you in the process. I am 72 years old. I raised a son alone through grief. I built a life brick by brick with a man who never raised his voice in 38 years, and I was almost written out of my own story by two people who mistook my patience for weakness. They were wrong. I was never a woman easily moved past. I was simply, for a little while, a woman choosing exactly when to be seen. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.